You're listening to Retro Reels, a show that looks back on films from time gone by and recalls the various events, trends, and perspectives that inform their creation. I'm your host, Hanna Belinsky, here to guide you through a trip to the past via the silver screen. I'm rewinding it back just a bit further this week to a 1931 movie called Daughter of the Dragon, and I'm excited to do this one because I gave Marlene Dietrich her due in the last episode, and now I have all the time in the world to devote to Anna May Wong. She's the one who played the supporting role as the other coaster in Shanghai Express. Hers is unfortunately quite a sad and frustrating story. She was the first Chinese-American film star to really break into Hollywood in a significant way, and even though she was beautiful and she was talented and she was successful, she also came up against continuous obstacles in her film career. She was almost always pigeonholed into playing certain Orientalist tropes again and again and almost never landed a leading role. At this time, miscegenation, i.e. race mixing, was against the law and also banned from any sort of artistic representation in the movies thanks to that pesky Hays Code. So the only way she would have been able to play the leading lady was opposite an Asian leading man. This, of course, never happened, and meant that she was frequently stuck doing the same few tired old shticks as a supporting role, and that was, of course, no way to build a proper career as a movie star. It got to a point that Wong was so frustrated with her treatment by American film studios that she tried relocating to Europe for a while, where she had a marginally better time playing a greater variety of roles. But in a strange twist of fate, it was precisely the exposure she got through working in European film that ended up landing her back in Hollywood under contract with Paramount Studios. This is right around the time she agreed to play the title character in Daughter of the Dragon. Even though it was yet another shallow, stereotypical role, it was finally the lead. And plus, the studio was dangling the opportunity to work with director Joseph von Sternberg on Shanghai Express in front of her nose like a carrot on a stick. So for that chance, she said, "Fine, I'll do this stupid Orientalist song and dance just one more time." Let's get this plot summary out of the way because it's quite mind-numbing. Daughter of the Dragon forces Wong to play the villain. Specifically, she's Princess Ling Moy, Fu Manchu's daughter, and she's living in London, working as an exotic dancer headlining her own show. Fu Manchu is thought to have died in the Boxer Rebellion 20 years ago, believing the person responsible for his death and the death of his family to be Sir John Petrie. So the story goes that he died swearing his vengeance on Sir John and the entire Petrie bloodline. Fu Manchu is, of course, not dead, a fact known by Morloff, who is Ling Moy's talent agent. Conveniently, he lives in a house right next door to the Petrie family and has also somehow managed to construct a secret passage between the two homes in preparation for his master's return and the meting out of his revenge. Sure, whatever. Ridiculous premise, but let's go on. A Chinese detective by the name of Aki, played by Japanese actor Sesue Hayakawa, who was incidentally the only male Asian actor to play any significant roles in Hollywood, alerts Sir Basil Courtney of Scotland Yard to Fu Manchu's arrival in London. Sir Basil is aware that Fu Manchu will make a beeline for the Petrie home so he can kill Sir John, but when he tries to call him to let him know, he finds the wires have been cut. Meanwhile, Sir John is chatting with his servant Rogers in his study about all the junk mail Rogers sorts out on his behalf. He calls his attention to one cryptic message marked with a dragon that basically foretells Fu Manchu's coming. Since the wires of his phone have been cut as well, he has Rogers rush off for help, but just then, Fu Manchu emerges from the shadows, having previously snuck in and been hiding in there since tampering with Sir John's pipe tobacco. Sir John confronts and tries to kill Fu Manchu, but finds himself under the inexplicable power of whatever drug was put in his tobacco, which basically hypnotizes him and forces him to do Fu Manchu's bidding. As the police arrive at the Petrie household, Fu Manchu leads Sir John out before everybody and kills him, but he is shot by Aki before he can finish off Sir John's son, Ronald. In the ensuing chaos, Fu Manchu manages to escape back to Morloff's house through the secret passage. However, the gunshot has left him mortally wounded. When Ling Moy shows up to see him, he tells her he's dying and bemoans his missed opportunity to complete his mission to eradicate the Petries, saying, "Oh, if only I'd had a son to carry it out on my behalf." Ling Moy is devastated and convinces him to consider her his son, promising to finish the job by killing Ronald. Fu Manchu finds this acceptable and hatches a plan to mislead the police and the Petrie family by threatening Ling Moy's life to throw suspicion off her. He sends someone over there to tell them he's going to kill her, and everyone rushes over to find him seemingly in the process of doing so, at which point he is finally shot dead by Aki. This ruse works well enough, and no one thinks there's any connection between Ling Moy and Fu Manchu. So a couple of months pass. Ling Moy has cozied up to Ronald, who seems to be developing a romantic interest in her despite his engagement to Joan Marshall. Detective Aki, who has been assigned to protect Ling Moy, also has a thing for her. When it gets down to the actual business of killing Ronald, Ling Moy can't find it within herself to do so, because she has, by now, fallen in love with him. Her failure has Fu Manchu's henchmen quite displeased with her, and feeling guilty, she prepares to stab herself at the altar to her ancestors. The henchmen stop her and burn some kind of magical incense of repentance, which renews Ling Moy's resolve to see this through to the end. So first, she rings up Aki and sets about seducing him to clear the way for the henchmen to kidnap Roger's fiancée, Joan. They imprison Joan in the basement of Morloff's house, but lead the police and the Petries to believe she's somewhere else so they can knock Ronald out and bring him to the house while he's unguarded. Aki realizes Ling Moy is tricking him and also that she's poisoned the wine she intended to share with him. He confronts her, she finally spills the beans about being Fu Manchu's daughter, and she has him tied up and hidden in the attic. Ronald wakes up in Ling Moy's house, who tries one more time to seduce him, but when he hears Joan screaming from the basement, he snaps out of it. Ling Moy loses her patience and tells him she's Fu Manchu's daughter, then has him tied up alongside Joan and tortures both of them. Meanwhile, Aki somehow manages to roll out of the attic into the yard outside and alerts the police, who are still loitering at the Petrie house scratching their heads. They raid the Morloff house and save Ronald and Joan, but Ling Moy slips through that old secret passage. When she tries one more time to kill Ronald, Aki busts through the door and shoots her down. Then he also dies, presumably from whatever injuries he sustained before. So for whatever inane reason, the movie conveniently kills off both of the Asian actors by the end. Okay. Well, music today is Zhou Xuan's rendition of Blooming Flowers and the Full Moon. This isn't the first time I've played a song by Zhou Xuan on the program. She was the one who sang the song that Wong Kar-wai's In the Mood for Love takes its Chinese name from. The reason I picked this song was because I think it nicely embodies 时代曲, which refers to a really old style of Chinese pop music that emerged in the 1920s and was notable for combining elements of Chinese folk with American jazz and a little bit of Hollywood film music. Anna May Wong happened to be kind of a fashion icon. She was one of the first movie stars to adopt the American flapper girl look of the Roaring '20s. So in a way, I think she herself represents the same fusion of Eastern and Western aesthetics that 时代曲 does. nice little song for an episode that is sadly about a very stupid, shameful excuse for a movie. I suppose since this is the second time I've talked about him, I should explain a little bit more about this character Fu Manchu. He was first created by English author Sax Rohmer in the early 1910s, and he's supposed to be an evil genius / mad scientist sort of guy, which would explain the strange weapons and poisons and magical serums he has access to. And at the same time, he's got this semi-supernatural Eastern mysticism thing going for him, as well as a penchant for torture that arises from the assumption that the Chinese as a people are uniquely cruel and emotionless and lacking in empathy. He effectively embodies the concept of yellow peril, this idea that Eastern people's ultimate goal is to conquer, enslave, or otherwise subjugate the West. In short, he's a racial boogeyman. In Daughter of the Dragon, he's played by Warner Oland, the Swedish guy who played the half-Chinese villain in Shanghai Express, and who is best known for playing the fictional character Charlie Chan in a long series of movies starting in 1931. I'll dig a bit more into him next week. This movie is, like The Mask of Fu Manchu, a bit of a mess. A lot of a mess. I would say even more so than The Mask of Fu Manchu was. You can still see a bit of the awkwardness of the film industry's transition from silent films to talkies, as it makes use of some expository intertitles to explain the backstory and to set the time and place. The plot is shallow, nonsensical, and ridiculous, and it is, above all, repeatedly offensive, not just to the Chinese, but once again to gay people, especially effeminate men, namely through the servant character Rogers, who's a bit of an uptight dandy, placed in the movie solely to serve as comedic relief. The joke here is basically everyone point and laugh at the girly man. And certainly it's offensive to women, especially Asian women, who are portrayed through Anna May Wong's character as, by turns, incompetent and weak in the flesh, and on the other hand, unafraid to leverage their sex appeal and capable of sadistic cruelty. This old dragon lady stereotype she often played is a bizarre, exoticized conflation of desire and fear that's been long put upon the Asian woman, not just in the movies but also in real life, particularly against Asian women who had any form of political power or demonstrated any characteristic that wasn't total submission. Its origins lie far, far back in the 19th century, around the time Chinese immigrants were first arriving in North America to work on building the Transcontinental Railroad. This fomented anti-Chinese sentiment that was largely based on the typical "they're taking our jobs" anxiety that you hear people in the United States say about immigrant groups to this day. These sentiments culminated in the passage of the Page Act of 1875, a federal immigration law enacted in the United States that restricted Chinese women from entering. Technically, it only restricted persons from East Asia entering to become a forced laborer or a prostitute or other such undesirable, but it was mainly leveraged as a blanket ban toward any East Asian women who were trying to get in. Under the Page Act, they were pretty much all made out to be a bunch of degenerate prostitutes, whether that's what they actually were or not. The Page Act was followed by the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, which restricted Chinese men as well. While the Chinese woman was a deviant sexbot ridden with disease who posed a decadent threat to white men, the Chinese man was typically mocked and emasculated in racial caricatures, made out to be incapable of ever seducing the ultimate target of their desire, the white woman. It all sounds very familiar to this day, to be honest. Any Asian girl who's come across an Asian fetishist in her dating life can tell you as much. And you could easily make the argument that even a contemporary Asian American star like Lucy Liu has been stuck playing roles reminiscent of the Dragon Lady, especially in Kill Bill and to a lesser extent in Charlie's Angels. The Dragon Lady isn't the only stereotype for us, of course. Opposite this is the Lotus Blossom, which is also hypersexualized, but instead of being thorny and aggressive, She's fragile, she's submissive and demure. Like Madame Butterfly, she's doting and she's devoted. She's ready to sacrifice herself in the name of love for just any old schmo. The lotus blossom is the precursor to the so-called good, subservient Asian wife who cooks and cleans for you that certain men with certain motives seek out to this day. And I won't even get into the whole tiger mom thing because I'll be here all day. No matter how much time passes, these racially and sexually charged concepts seem to refuse to die. Such is the awful and enduring power of the stereotype. Mind you, the racism and sexism extended behind the scenes of this movie as well. Even though Anna May Wong was the top-billed star, she was only paid $6,000 for her role. Warner Oland, remember, Swedish guy playing Chinese villain Fu Manchu, was paid double that for appearing in no more than 25% of the movie, maybe. Considering getting underpaid was kind of the trend across the board for women for a long time, and still is to a certain extent depending on where you are and what sort of work you do, that's neither here nor there. Just another thing to add to the pile of injustices that she had to take on the chin during her career. I think perhaps the cruelest part of Anna May Wong's story is after what was technically still a pretty successful lifetime effort, in spite of consistently unfair treatment by the Western film industry, she received no love from her own countrymen. For the duration of her career, Chinese press had generally bashed her, calling her a disgrace to the country who spread negative stereotypes about Chinese women, as if she had a choice when those were the only roles she was given. And the Chinese government even stood in the way of what could have been the most successful, positive, racially appropriate role Wong could have played in her entire career, the leading lady Olan in the MGM adaptation of Pearl Buck's novel The Good Earth. Not that the studio needed much convincing from the Chinese, as they never intended to cast Wong in the lead anyway, and instead chose German-born actress Louise Rayner, who went on to win the Best Actress Oscar for her performance. What really rubs this in is Wong was offered the part of Lotus, but she refused because she would once again have been playing the villain, and not just the villain, but the only bad character among a cast of white people portraying good Chinese characters. After this whole debacle, she took a trip back to China to visit her family and get back in touch with her roots, only to find herself unwelcome by her own kind, facing difficulty communicating and generally being treated like an outsider. Too Western for the East, too Eastern for the West. It's a tale as old as time for a lot of Western-born Asian people who find themselves straddling both cultures. All I can say is, I'm sorry Anna May Wong had to be the one to blaze the trail. That's all I have for you guys today. I'm Hannah Belinsky. Thank you for tuning in to Retro Reels, and I hope you'll join me again next time on another look back on the way things were.